In the heart of downtown Chicago, there is a bridge that makes no sense, as it leads directly into a modern skyscraper. This is the Kinzie Street Railroad Bridge, once a crucial freight link for the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. And these days, it's locked in an upright position, towering above the Chicago River, its rusted frame pointing skyward. To most, it looks like an abandoned mistake, a half-finished bridge left hanging in midair. But its story is anything but accidental. So why does this obsolete structure still stand in one of America's most modern skylines? And what does it tell us about the industrial history that shaped the city? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the story behind Chicago's Railroad Bridge to Nowhere. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. To understand the story of the Kinzie Street Railroad Bridge, we have to first understand the story of Chicago itself. The city began as a riverside trading post in the late 18th century. For decades, it was a quiet frontier settlement with no major skyline or railroads, just a handful of cabins trading fur, timber, and grain. But by the 1830s, everything changed. You see, the Erie Canal had opened routes from the Atlantic into the Great Lakes, meaning that settlers from the east, especially those from New York, poured into Illinois in search for farmland. Chicago's location, where river met lake, made it the perfect crossroads for trade. Within a single decade, its population exploded from just a few hundred to more than 4,000. With that growth came an urgent problem, though. The river divided the young town into two. On the north bank was Wolf Point, home to taverns, warehouses, and docks, whereas on the west bank stood new plots and farmland that needed access to the riverfront. In an effort to connect the two sides, a ferry operated by tavern owner Samuel Miller handled traffic at first, but it quickly became overwhelmed. Hence, in 1832, the city took its first steps towards a permanent connection, a small wooden footbridge just south of Kinzie Street. This was the first bridge ever built across the Chicago River, an unassuming start to what would become one of the most bridge-filled cities in the world. As Chicago grew into a national hub, its ambitions rose alongside it. By the mid-19th century, the railroads had arrived. The Galena and Chicago Union Railroad began operation in 1848, building its depot near the west bank of the river at Kinzie. Just across the water, the Wells Street Station opened in 1851 on the east side, forcing engineers to confront a new challenge. How do you get trains across the river? Engineers Jenk D. Perkins provided that answer. He designed a floating pontoon bridge, a simple, flexible stand that could rise and fall with the water level. It became Chicago's first railroad bridge and the first true ancestor of the Kinzie Street Bridge as we see today. But like many firsts, it didn't last. Floating bridges were unstable and dangerous, especially for heavy locomotives. So in 1879, the city replaced it with a more advanced design, a steel swing bridge that could pivot to open, allowing traffic through the river. It was one of America's earliest examples of an all-street railroad bridge and proof that Chicago's engineers were pushing the limits of industrial innovation. Unfortunately, those limits were not well understood. The swing bridge was made of Bessemer steel, cheap, lightweight, and brittle. Within just 2 decades, the material began to fail. Worse yet, the bridge's rotating span proved too slow for the growing numbers of ships moving up and down the river. By the 1890s, the Kinzie Bridge had become a choke point, too fragile for railroads and too cumbersome for riverboats. But those tensions truly came to a head when a near disaster in which a passenger train nearly derailed into the river only reinforced that something had to change. And so it was. Chicago tried once again. At the dawn of the 20th century, a new kind of bridge was rising in popularity, the bascule bridge, or drawbridge. You see, instead of swinging horizontally, it lifted vertically, clearing the way for boats of any height to pass. With that in mind, in 1907, construction began on a massive new bridge at Kinzie Street, one that would eclipse all of its predecessors. This time, the project was handled by Strauss Bascule and Concrete Bridge Company, led by engineer Joseph Strauss, the same man who would go on to later design the Golden Gate Bridge. Strauss revolutionized movable bridge design by using reinforced concrete instead of heavy iron counterweights, making his bridges cheaper, stronger, and easier to maintain. The Kinzie Street Bridge pushed his methods to their limit. Its foundation reached nearly 100 feet below the riverbed, anchoring what was then the world's longest and heaviest span of Bascule Bridge, at almost 200 feet across. When opened in 1908, it represented the pinnacle of early 20th century engineering. Chicago had once again proven that it could build bigger, faster, and smarter than almost any other city in America. But success always came with a twist. Just 3 years after the new bridge opened, Wells Street Station, the very destination it had been built to serve, was shut down. A new terminal was opened on the west side of the river, making the bridge's passenger function nearly obsolete. By 1911, it was used exclusively for freight. Now, for a while, this seemed to be enough, especially since the rise of the merchandise mart in the 1930s brought more freight across the river, giving the bridge a new purpose, as for about a decade, trains indeed were rumbling across it with goods to the largest commercial building in the world. But then came the death blow, when Chicago's railways began facing competition from trucks, from highways, and from a changing economy that no longer depended on freight train service to downtown Chicago. By the middle of the 20th century, the Kinzie Street Railroad Bridge had already begun to outlive its purpose. The industries it once served were vanishing. Factories along the Chicago River closed after World War II, leaving behind little more than abandoned warehouses and empty tracks. And like I said before, freight itself was changing. What once arrived by train now came by truck, much faster, cheaper, and better suited to the short city deliveries, meaning the rail lines that once fed the Kinzie Bridge began to erode. There were some attempts to save it. In the 1950s, planners proposed converting the line into a commuter route, a way to move passengers through the growing downtown area, though this idea never left the drawing board. Later, another proposal surfaced to adopt the bridge for automobile traffic, but that plan too was rejected. And so it was. With no new use and little demand for freight inside the city center, the bridge's decline was inevitable. By the 1970s, only a handful of companies still received deliveries by rail along that corridor, and one by one, they shut down and switched over to trucking. Technically speaking, the bridge did keep working, but barely. By the 1990s, it carried just a single daily train. That train belonged to the Chicago Sun-Times. Each morning, a locomotive crossed the river to deliver paper rolls to the newspaper's printing plant on the North Bank. When the run was complete, the bridge lifted back into its vertical position, waiting until the next morning to lower once again. For years, this ritual continued. A bridge built to serve industry was now serving just one customer and once per day. It was little more than a ghost of its former self. But then came the final trip. In 2001, the Chicago Sun-Times relocated its printing operations to a new facility on the city's south side, and with that, the last freight train crossed that spring. Afterwards, the operators raised the bridge one final time and locked it there forevermore. Now, the story should have probably ended there, but Chicago has a complicated relationship with its ruins. You see, the bridge was not demolished. Preservationists, historians, and city planners argued that it represented a key piece of Chicago's industrial identity. Rather than tear it down, they pushed to protect it. In 2007, the city granted the bridge official landmark status, ensuring that it would remain a permanent part of the skyline. Today, the Kinzie Street Bridge is lowered once a year for inspection and maintenance, and each time, engineers check the gears, cables, and counterweights to confirm that the mechanics still work. For many locals, the event has become a small but important tradition, a reminder that even when obsolete, some machines still matter. And perhaps that's the most fitting ending of all. A bridge that once connected two sides of a growing metropolis now connects two ideas of what Chicago means: progress on one side and preservation on the other. And that's the story of Chicago's Bridge to Nowhere. If you enjoyed this episode and you've got an idea for another one, let us know by visiting our community section over here on YouTube and leave a comment. I'll be in touch. Chances are we'll explore your idea. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.